biannual reviews. I have to do it twice. So the quarterly review that you and I have set up on this podcast, it keeps me honest. It keeps me on my toes a little bit. But that's okay. It's all part of the job, I guess. But no, it's all good.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I enjoy it especially. But yeah, quarterly, see it. I did that as a goal. I hope we talk at least 4 times this year because I enjoy it. So
it seems fair. I mean, like every 3 months there is, for whatever reason in American soccer, every 3 months you're guaranteed to have something relatively seismic worth talking about. So it seems like a pretty safe benchmark.
Well, and at your pace of reporting, honestly, there's always plenty to talk about with just every 3 months. I agree. So
that's a lot.
That's what I want to start with today. You wrote an article that I'm basically calling the Valentine from Jeff Rueter to Phil Grooms, because it is one of my favorite topics to talk about in lower league soccer. Why the U.S. lower division transfer market has stalled out is the name of the article on The Athletic, and you better go look it up and read it if you haven't. Jeff, why don't you get us started? Let's just open the floodgates, because I've got almost a whole page of notes here to talk about.
Right. Yeah. And this is a piece that if you've been following the USL for at least a year and a half now, you're probably like, well, wait a minute, he's written that piece already before this past month. And that's true. I think January 2020, I'd put out a piece about why there aren't more players specifically moving from the USL Championship at that time to Major League Soccer. This one's a little more holistic, because I think as the USL, and to be fair, by the way, I think that this was necessary as they started League One, as they had a little bit more control over the tiers of the pyramid in the middle section. The clubs that are establishing their presence in League One, plus the clubs in the championship that are looking for ways to improve their rosters and tap into the players who have played well in that third division League One, plus the clubs that then want to take young talent and ideally move them to Major League Soccer. There's a lot of different kind of conflicts of interest that are being established right now. Some of these are unavoidable, by the way. I think that especially if you look at the League One clubs that are playing well, you don't want to necessarily get rid of your best players every single year. But right now, there's sort of that contention between being competitive in the short term and trying to be developmental to boost your financial status, because generally speaking in the USL or in American soccer in general, actually, one of the surest ways to guarantee revenue or profit is by selling players, because then you're not at the risk of having fans, which obviously has not been the case for most clubs. And even for the clubs that have been having fans in 2020 weren't at a significant portion or at their full expectation. Economically, you need additional sources of revenue. Merchandise is obviously one part of this, but player sales tends to be much more lucrative than any jersey that you can release in the middle of the summer. So it's sort of just a look at what is factoring into not just the lack of movement into Major League Soccer, but within the USL, how these deals are done, these deals which involve actual tangible currency, not allocation money. So it's even harder to put a valuation on this player is worth this much, this player is worth that much, and how the leagues right now are trying to go about establishing that transfer market.
Yeah, and you got a lot of amazing quotes from 2 awesome guys, Dan Egner in this article and Landon Donovan. Really good quotes, but here's another one. Here's one where Landon's talking about. Sorry, my kid is trying to.
Oh, you're okay. Do you want me to? If you have the quote here, I can read it.
We're just gonna roll with it here, because setting a baseline is something that both guys have mentioned in this one. And here's a quote: "With all due respect, I see MLS clubs paying transfer fees of $300,000 to $1 million to clubs abroad. I'm not here to tell you that there are League One players who are on par with some of those players, but the difference between a $5,000 player and a $500,000 player in this example is not accurate." And he goes on for more math, but he talks about one League One player was demanding a club was demanding $100,000 in the first ask, and how that wasn't going to happen. And but then 4-digit transfer fees is typical from League One to USL Championship. So, right. God, that's a huge mass difference, and we have no baseline. We need to establish the market and have something that clubs, if they want to use this as a lifeline for revenue, figure out what the base is for that.
And I think what's interesting, some people, it seems like, still ask Landon Donovan how long he's been around soccer. So I just want to clarify that he has been in soccer for a very long time. Longer, in fact, than just about any club in lower division soccer has been around. So I think that when you're looking at sizing up the market, look, there's always been a disparity. The American player at any league, at any level, tends to be cheaper than the Brazilian, the Argentine, the Brit, the Spaniard, right? Like some of these upper tier countries, the countries that tend to compete for World Cups or tend to produce the best players in the world, Ballon d'Or nominees, FIFA Best 11, those players will come at a premium, and their compatriots, regardless of if they're at that level, will be worth more because there is a perceived higher market value for a player from, frankly, a sexier soccer nation. Mm-hmm. Conversely, what you also see then is that there are markets to exploit. Part of this is looking at, again, what are those countries that are often overlooked? The Costa Ricas, honestly, most of CONCACAF, except for Mexico and the United States. South America, when you get beyond, well, I guess there's so few countries there, but when you're looking at like the Bolivias, the Venezuelas, the Ecuadors, there might be some opportunity there. Paraguay is kind of straddling that line. Europe, you can obviously see in the coefficient rankings which countries these would be. But when you then factor in difference in levels, difference in player ability, veteran status, it's so tricky to compare. So targeted allocation money players would be the players that require those $300,000 to $1 million transfer fees. And if you're looking at that player, that's usually a player who isn't playing for usually, I'm not talking about like Blaise Matuidi or anything, but these are usually players who are not playing regularly for a first division club in one of the 5 major European leagues. These are usually a player who, if they're in those countries, might be either in a relegation zone club, they might be in the second division. The point being, they're not necessarily like the player who's automatically, without a doubt, going to be better than what the domestic player pool has to offer. Anytime I see an MLS club use targeted allocation money on a goalkeeper, I just immediately scratch my head on this, and I'm wondering why, because that is the deepest player pool in the United States. Why are you saying we need to spend $500,000 to get Kenneth Vermeer when you could sign Josh Cohen and see how he would do at that level, right? I mean, these goalkeepers are everywhere. Frankly, it is the best player pool, top to bottom, in the United States. When you then look at it to scale, again, a league without allocation money, a league without a salary cap, you aren't seeing the same outlays of transfer fees, but you are then seeing, okay, how much are we going to pay for this League One player? Right now, that tends to be about $4,000 to $10,000. That is the range. There have been 5 player sales to date from League One to the championship. The largest was Brian Silvestri when he went from Forward Madison to the Miami FC for $20,000. But again, that was a goalkeeper who had already started a dozen games in Major League Soccer and was not in his prime yet. I mean, these are like cyclical questions, right? Because then you're asking, okay, well then, are we supposed to inflate the value of these players because they're proven in our league, which is invaluable, to be fair, when you know that they won't be intimidated by the bus ride from Tulsa out to Kansas City. They won't be intimidated by it. The climate changes, the changes in climate across the country, not climate change, which is a very real thing all over the world. When you're talking about, the 2 games a week, the second division in the United States, everything that comes with that, the baseline standards that are close, hopefully, to being established in the first CBA, those sorts of questions, that player is going to be fine with that. That the player who spent a year with the Richmond Kickers, which is like a good, competitive, developmentally friendly League One club, that they're going to be able to translate at least that comfort level if they sign with, say, the Charlotte Independents, right? Mm-hmm. So that player should be more valuable because it's more likely to hit, but that's not how it's treated, because I think that there's also how many other leagues are actually going to be looking at League One's player pool and scouting. If you're thinking like Liga MX is probably not scouting this too closely. Even the Expansión League, the second division that they established last year, Canadian Premier League might be, but beyond that, it's really your market to control. And at that point, the championship clubs don't want it to get too pricey. They don't want to lose money on this either. So again, all of these different little conflicting factors that are very human, very understandable from a business perspective as well, frankly. But ultimately, and when I look at this, I'm going to come at this as agnostic to the business side, right? I mean, it's not really something I worry about. I'm thinking about what's good for the sport. I'm thinking about what's good for these players' careers, their development, their opportunity, the growth of the game in the country. That's always going to be my central ethos when I'm looking at these sorts of things. And if you are holding back a third division player who had one good year from getting to the second division, which is a step up, right? This isn't necessarily a life-changing move, but it's working your way towards one. And you're going to hold them back because you want $100,000 for this player. Then at that point, that player's career is going to suffer because you have this kind of fantasy evaluation that you want to be able to sell your fan base. And that's a very difficult prospect to try to wrestle with as you're working towards developing players.
Yeah, a lot of things to wrestle with because, Landon had great quotes about the player's perspective about being held back and how he'd be pissed if someone did that to him. But also, we're talking about supply and demand as well. You mentioned goalkeepers on TAM deals when, there are goalkeepers everywhere. And so that's true on every level where you could find a local guy. Landon mentioned a local 16-year-old San Diegan that he'd like to take a stab at rather than spending $80,000 or $50,000 or $20,000 to bring someone in if they're going to ask too much. So people, again, developing baselines, owners and GMs are pioneers right now trying to figure out what the value of a player is. And as the league grows, hopefully that keeps going up. But, it almost needs to be something they all work together for, because you're talking about what you said, the ethos of the league, the development of United States soccer and the pyramid. Sometimes I think we need to kind of let go of winning, like you were saying there, instead of, and be willing to let your players move up and get something developed here and a standardization of some sort.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, and Donovan talks about this a little bit, where he says, it doesn't matter what you think a house should be worth. If you're looking to move to San Diego, San Francisco, Chicago, right? And you see a house and you're like, oh, that's a fine house, but the market tells you it's $1 million house because that's what housing goes for, and that it's $1 million house. You don't get to dictate that. And so that's, again, where these goalkeeper fees for like a 35-year-old Dutchman, that's where those come into play, is because that is the value for someone leaving the Eredivisie. Likewise, though, if you want to be able to say our player that we invested in, like I'm just going to make up a kid, right? Let's say that there's like a 16-year-old who comes from Union Omaha's academy. Okay. And this 16-year-old midfielder, first half of the season, just kind of learning from Jay Mims. Second half of the season, forces his way into like a winger role. He's an inverted left winger. Okay. He does pretty well. He gets 3 goals, 4 assists in 18 appearances, has 1 goal in the playoffs, looks pretty good. And he gets interest from, pick a club. I don't know. We're rolling at this point. This kid doesn't exist. So
this is Football Manager in our brains right now.
Yes, this is exactly what I'm doing. So let's say that kid goes to San Antonio FC. San Antonio FC has proven to be, you see Christian Pirano, you see Jose Gallegos, you see Leo Torres, you see some of these players, say, okay, that'd be a good spot to put a young player. So they sign him for $15,000. Okay, straight up. And then they have like 10% sell on for Union Omaha for this player's future move. That player then continues to develop, continues to play well. By 18, he's a 5-5 kind of guy. He's working his way up to 5-8. He scores another couple goals in the championship playoffs. MLS comes looking at him. You won't get a fee less than that because you've already invested that, which implies that his baseline level has to be above $15,000. It has to be above that. So then that player is more valuable as a result of that. So now you can sell him for $100,000 plus the or more, frankly, probably $150,000 easy, plus a sell-on percentage. So you also get a 10% cut of that. And then Union Omaha keeps some sort of cut as well as part of this negotiation. MLS, then, this player, 19 years old, starts getting caps for the US U20s, right? Like you can envision this. That player ends up going and signing in Germany at age 20. MLS team probably gets, $3-4 million for him. Good portion of that goes back to San Antonio. Good portion of that goes back to Union Omaha. You control your own destiny by setting these prices, because that's unless the player doesn't improve, that's not a depreciating investment. That's not a car. So at that sense, if you are good at your development side, you will increase the value of these players. That's a question of staffing, right? And I'm sure we'll get to that, which was part of the article, but there are elements of this you can control. And if you are trying to limit the ceiling on this market, you are hurting yourself in the long run if your aim ultimately is to in turn make a sale.
Absolutely. So two things there. I guess we'll start with this. Dan Egner talked about how work ethic and how he was able to, in his role, sell Stanley Akumu to IFL Spurg for record-breaking $200,000 from USL Championship. This is not an MLS contract. That's awesome. That's incredible. And he said it's because he was able to work hard at trying to find the right place to market his guy to the right place for the right price while he was there. And if you have a guy who's a GM, who's also a coach, who is doing the business side and the player technical side, everything, it's too much. You just can't focus on everything at once.
Right.
You do one in the off season, you do one in the regular season. And so he mentioned how he was able to do that because of that. So this is a problem because people don't have time. Let's start with that. That's crazy.
Well, and you can't necessarily assume that the coaches who aren't able to wear that dual role with a perfect 50-50 balance are bad at their jobs. Because with how much of, put it another way, the mid-season, the summer window isn't as important in the USL as it is in Major League Soccer, right? It just isn't. This isn't a league that necessarily halfway through the season is looking to make a deal. Anytime, like there would be a couple of trades where you would see like Louisville City sends this player to, I'm trying to remember the club. There was one, like a player for player trade in the USL last year. And I was like, my mind was blown that was something that clubs actually considered at this level. I think it was El Paso, North Carolina. But beyond that, you're looking at pretty static rosters once the season starts because these coaches need to win games or they need to develop players or both. And at that point, they are completely focused on the players that they have. They have built their team in the off season thinking this team will last me 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, depends how long the season goes for them. And at that point, I'll catch my breath. I'll change chairs and I will start scouting League One. I'll suddenly back watch all of these games to try to figure out if I want to sign those players. Not interested? Okay, I'm going to watch all of Reno's games and St. Louis's games and see if I want anyone from their rosters. If I don't, then I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to move on to players who are free agents, right, in the USL. Maybe I'll think of scouting a couple of international leagues. Maybe I'm watching MLS as well and considering some of the guys who fall off of those rosters. But that's it. That's really all they have the time for. And that's understandable in every single way. The hard part is it doesn't have to be that way. Like you really can invest. It's not a ridiculous amount of money, but you can invest as a sporting director and you can continue to do that work. You can have someone like Egner was with Real Monarchs speaking to these clubs abroad and say, hey, we've got this player. He's going to be in the African Cup of Nations. You should keep an eye on him. Just watch his club, watch his country, see how they do in the tournament. And if you like him, then hit me up and we'll see what we can do. Lay out that groundwork because the coach won't have time to do that if that's fully on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe they can get creative in that way. A lot of mentions about scouting needing to get better, and that scouting will lead to evaluating people and finding players in those countries nearby that aren't being utilized right now. So scouting could help creating different positions for people like during the season, someone who just does the scouting and looking for players and shopping his guys around. It'd be interesting. Let's talk about Burano. You threw some numbers in this and we knew it was a mistake. They've been ripped to pieces for not selling Pirano. Reported by you, $40,000 offer with incentives up to $125,000. That is putting actual concrete numbers. We're talking about establishing the market. Those are concrete numbers for someone who's a very good player in USL Championship that is worthy of MLS. We know that because he just went to Portugal's first division. Right. This is amazing. And that's a high number, higher than I even expected, though he is an amazing talent.
Right. And it's not necessarily even that $125,000 is like a number you can't imagine. But when you look at USL players who have moved upward, I mean, there aren't that many. You're looking at, Brian Anunga, for example, went from Charleston to Nashville for $50,000 all in. Okay. And like, that's kind of like, I don't know if that's necessarily the record. I think that there might've been some other movement that maybe has eclipsed that, but like Tyler Pasher, $30,000 up front, up to 50. These are all numbers that I've reported out. These are never announced. So, I mean, if you believe my reporting, believe these numbers. If you don't believe my reporting, then let's talk. Alvin Jones to Real Salt Lake for $10,000. Mark Anthony Kaye for $35,000.
Crazy.
Ridiculous. Like, these are not numbers that you and I would struggle to imagine, right? Like, we're not talking about the astronomical fees or like the Alphonso Davies sell-on clauses and all of this sorts of stuff. But what it is, it's real money. Even if he doesn't, these benchmarks weren't like, oh, if he wins the MVP, then sure, we'll give you $50,000, right? Like, it was attainable. It was play in X number of games, score a few goals, have some assists. Like these sorts of things, you can bank on that player accomplishing. And so in that sense, I mean, let's say that you look at those and say, okay, $80,000 of this is almost certain, and then the other 45 is gravy if we can get it. That's $80,000. That is like comfortably 2 players.
Yeah.
That is $80,000 more dollars than you would get for winning the USL Championship final, which has no prize money, or the regular season, which has no prize money right now.
A t-shirt and a medal is what Dan said.
A t-shirt and a medal is all that you get for winning it, right? Yeah. Like and that might be its own article someday, actually. Why isn't there prize money in the USL? But I think that I understand the allure of winning. I really do. And Egner says this better because he's won the USL as sporting director. And it's like, I get the allure. I get that you want to do it. But if you've got that money in your hands, take it. Just take it and believe in your ability to say, as Landon puts it in the article, any player at this level, and no disrespect to the player pool, is replaceable. No player here is like, we couldn't possibly dream of having a player come in and do their job, or we aren't able to scout to find a replacement, right? Like at that level, at the 3rd division and the 2nd division, you should be able to find somebody similarly because you've already done it. Yep. And it's not necessarily like you've unearthed Messi. So at that point, you might as well take the money and invest it in the next one and maybe another one too, and then continue the cycle. Because then you look at Pirano, and let's say he comes off, it's a $90,000 ultimately before he moves on, and people are calling about Jose Gallegos, which they will be and they are already, or Leo Torres in 4 years or 3 years or however long, because he's the child. At that point, then you say, okay, well, Pirano was this. We think that he's going to be as good, if not better. You're starting now at $75,000, and our incentives build off of that. And they can't argue it because they've already had that track record. And instead, what has happened is they sat on Pirano. They could not have foreseen, in their defense, that they would not have a playoff run with fans. They could not have foreseen that they would not have that additional revenue. But at that point, you're like $15 tickets, 4,000 fans, that's $6,000 a game. So it doesn't come close to adding up unless suddenly this becomes March Madness and it's like an 8-round tournament. So that's lost money. They end up losing in the first round in New Mexico. Again, like, not many fans, you couldn't control that. And then the player leaves for free to a better league than Major League Soccer. Yeah. And so the optics of that, you want to be able to say, congratulations, Christian, on your progression. Look how you came through, the Boca Academy, the River Plate Academy. The USL Championship landed you on Liga NOS's radar. That's fantastic. You didn't get anything for that. Yeah. And it was so avoidable that I have gotten more calls from within the USL circle at the club level. So I'm talking about coaches and sporting directors and whatever, about that transfer, wondering what happened, than probably anything that's happened in the USL over the last 2.5 years. Because they're like, in our situation, how do you turn that down? You can't. So,
and to put all that together, it's like you mentioned that there's 5 people that didn't go to college, 5 players that didn't go to college in the United States that are from that general area, from South America, Central America in the USL Championship. So again, scouting. And it's not like Okumu was free transfer. Pirano, I think, was a free transfer, right?
Yes, he was.
So that's all profit, except for the salary, of course. It's all profit. Tell me, winning USL Championship, are the ticket sale increase and the merch sale increase going to equal $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000? I think you and I are landing on a point that GMs in the USL even need to learn now, or maybe they have all learned now, thanks to San Antonio, that winning doesn't matter as much as selling a player on. And on top of that, the last thing I'll say is that American fans are getting smarter about soccer. Yeah. We enjoy selling players on. It's becoming a thing in our country finally, right? And maybe it's just a nerdy. Maybe it's just a nerdy thing right now, but I think most soccer fans are getting smart enough to like that. And they're going to buy some tickets to see the next sale of San Antonio FC, which is Gallegos right now. You know what I mean?
Right. Who won MLS Cup in 2017? Off the top of your head, who won MLS Cup? But
I'm trying to think what year it is.
Right, exactly. It's one of Toronto or Seattle. Yeah. That's your safe guess. There was Atlanta in 2018, and since then it's been one or the other, except for the Crew last year. But if you're looking at what are MLS fans most excited about, what gets MLS Twitter just like to the moon, whatever, it's Alphonso Davies scoring a goal or winning another trophy.
Like FC Dallas sending the next player over.
Yeah, the next right back, because it's only right backs right now. But like, these are the things that get American soccer fans excited right now. I think that 3 years ago, there was a perception issue. There was an issue that why would fans go to games if they feel like their best players are going to leave? Now, Red Bulls fans are very frustrated about the direction of the organization. Don't get me wrong about that. But they're very excited to see like Tyler Adams. Look at him. Great. Caden Clark, we get a full year to watch him before he goes to Leipzig. Fantastic. Let's watch that. That's something that I'm interested in. We're more sophisticated. We've embraced that we are a selling country, not just a selling league in MLS terms, but a selling country. We are a place where players will develop, but if they're going to play the best soccer of their careers, they're not going to be played usually in Major League Soccer. And I think that by and large, the average American soccer fan is okay with that. I think so. Like, yes, there are going to be a couple of fans who will say, get me my Carlos Vela, get me my player who is in their prime, and just let them run for 5, 6, 10 years, get the Diego Valeri deal out of it. And that is what makes me happiest. And that's okay. That's totally understandable.
It is.
But I don't think that the same perception issues about you keep selling our best young players exist that would have existed 3 to 5 years ago in this country. I think that part has become accepted and encouraged, frankly.
Completely agree. And we have a mix of both. You just mentioned Valeri and that style of doing things. There's more than one way to do this in the MLS and in the USL. You talked about in your John Wolniak piece, which I absolutely loved. He's such an interesting coach. I've been wanting a piece exactly like that. So it was really fun to read. But it got me thinking about different pathways and how we've got this MLS2 team. And I just want to talk about MLS2 teams in the USL, the Reserve League,
You're going to get me in trouble again. Okay.
Okay. I forgot. I was trying to think what got you in trouble in the first place. And I'm totally fine with getting you in trouble because it's fun for me.
Yeah, you don't care. It's not your
right. But we have 2 players. I thought this was interesting to bring up. Aiden Stanley, and there's probably not just 2, but these are the 2 that came to mind. Aiden Stanley, and I'm losing it in my notes who the other player was. Josh Penn.
Josh Penn. Yeah.
So both were signed. One was Portland Timbers 2, signed a USL contract. The other one was Indy 11 USL contract. Both got drafted in the Super Draft and are now signing with the MLS teams, which makes sense. We can talk about that. Just go. Tell me about that situation and how the Super Draft and MLS2 teams are going to be going in the future.
Well, I think that there's different ways to go about this. First, yes, there was a little bit of confusion about. So Aiden Stanley played for Timbers 2 last year. He had just signed a contract 5 days before the draft with Sporting Kansas City 2. So everyone was like, okay, well, that's just going to be where he plays. But Major League Soccer has said that in any deal involving a draft eligible player or a player who is foregoing their college eligibility to sign with a USL club, so not signing an amateur contract is the best way to look at that. Like St. Louis FC had a lot of players on amateur contracts, including Aiden Stanley, actually.
Yeah.
And so you're able to still play them. Jeremy Abobasi did the same thing with the Charleston Battery in 2016, and then they keep their eligibility for the MLS Super Draft, which is the mechanism. Like it or not, there are issues with it. There are definitely some advantages to it, but that is the way that players who are not in an academy who played college soccer get into Major League Soccer. We can revisit that another year. So at this point, what MLS wants to avoid is the Super Draft being curtailed by players signing in the USL Championship when they are also eligible for selection. There's some timeline stuff that's really interesting because like Josh Penn, for example, would not have been a graduated senior. So why was he suddenly available, but not a Generation Adidas player?
Yeah.
That's a question I've never been able to get answered, no matter how many
Okay,
times
thanks.
but I've tried. I will keep trying to figure that one
weird.
out too, and I'll report it. It's a very strange situation. Like, why this year and not 2 years from now? I have no idea. I wish I knew, but I have no idea. But with Stanley, what they're trying to say is you can't just sign with an MLS2 club, play for half a year, and then they magically say, we signed this guy we found in the USL. How crazy. Because that is working. That's draft dodging, I guess, to use a very
like that term.
familiar term. Right, we're going to use draft dodging for this. With Josh Penn, where that got interesting is he isn't with an MLS2 club. So with Aiden Stanley's case, the shortest version of this is that there was language in his contract when he signed with Sporting Kansas City 2 that said if he is selected and offered a contract, then he has to sign with the club that drafted him. And what they do with him, they might loan him back to you. You don't know that, but probably not. So Austin FC selected Aiden Stanley, and that's where it becomes contentious if he is signed. With Josh Penn's case, Inter Miami really wanted to sign him. They drafted him in the top 10. They had that sort of belief in him. So what the clubs agreed to, rather than a fee, is that if Josh Penn gets loaned away from the MLS club, this is again per the Athletic sources, so whatever you want to believe in it, he will be loaned to Indy 11 instead of Fort Lauderdale CF, which is their USL affiliate, which you probably forgot existed. So he will be going to the second division back home to Indy if he doesn't land this year with the MLS club. Something that I haven't reported, but here you go. If he doesn't come to Indy in 21, Miami will probably owe a player to Indy in 22. So I don't know necessarily how you're going to force that. Like, do you just say, okay, well, give us Gonzalo Higuain for 5 games and we're going to be very happy about this? Or do you say like, yes, your next super draft first round pick who isn't landing, we have the right of first refusal on any player before you send them to Fort Lauderdale, where if we say, actually, we like that guy, we get that player for 22. They'll have to figure that out, I'm sure. And that's stuff that would never quite get to my radar. But yes, there will be a player going from Miami, whether it's most likely Josh Penn or not. It just kind of depends on how training camp goes and how many old Europeans David Beckham brings in. So,
right. Yes. Inter Miami having fun down there.
Yeah.
What about you, MLS2 teams? Do you think they're going to stay? Do you think they're not? How do you, I guess you may or may not be able to say that, but how do you feel about it after you've ruminated on it for a little while?
I think that there's, I stand by, so I haven't listened back, to be fair, but I tend to stand by what I say on shows like yours and others. I do think that there will always continue to be some competitive merit. I do think that there is an imbalance in terms of, I understand on the advertising side, whether it's in terms of what games you would give big ESPN or ESPN2 or Deportes or whatever, you aren't going to want to show them an empty Red Bull Arena. I wouldn't either. But it's in terms of, when are you excited about the players who came through the academy ranks? When are you excited about Alphonso Davies? Like, are you going to be able to promote that? What about Brian Brown, who was, playing abroad for a couple of years? What about Josh Cohen? I don't see a ton about him necessarily from USL channels. But I think that the bigger issue here, it has nothing really to do with how the league is promoted. I think that it's more about, again, the competitive balance. What's best for the development of the country? What's best for the development of the sport in the country, not the development of the country, which soccer will not fix, no matter how hard I try. I think that there's still more good than harm that comes from MLS2 clubs. And it's not just by saying your favorite independent club is pretty much always going to win those games. That's not what I mean when I'm saying that, it's for the best. What it is that you are able to actually showcase young talent. You are getting some scouts of MLS clubs or clubs abroad who are watching your game specifically because they're interested in Caden Clark. And who does Red Bulls 2 play that weekend? Oh, Hartford. Okay, well, I guess I'm watching Hartford too. Yeah. What is this team up to? Like, you have some built-in eyes on a sporting business side purely because you have the MLS affiliates. Your mileage may vary in terms of which affiliates are doing this best. Not everyone runs it like Red Bulls or Monarchs. There are certainly some that haven't kept up with where the league is going, and I think that those clubs will find their level eventually, whether that is League One or the Reserves League, which now looks likely to come in 2022. So I think that that partnership is still so well. It is now so kind of fluid. There are so many elements of it that have to be figured out year to year as the roster of clubs changes as well. But I think that both leagues have benefited. I think that it stabilized the USL and gave it the launching pad where it was able to eclipse the NASL and become the second division of US soccer in the men's side of the game. It gave them by proxy the ability to start a third division league because they left that space of the pyramid. And so they had an open territory. And so they created their own. It has been very good for the USL on a business side. From a sporting side, you've had champions. You've had U.S. men's national team players. You have plenty of national team players in CONCACAF actually come through the USL Championship. That is good. That is the kind of thing you should want to showcase. So I think that, yes, there are still some clubs that, again, have not kept up. They're not nearly as exciting to watch as even a couple of independent clubs that have been around for 5 years and aren't necessarily the what's new factor, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that they still add more to the league than they take from it. So just don't put them on your national broadcast most of the time unless they're on the road. And then you're probably good to go from that point.
Yeah, I almost want to like purposefully hide them. I think that's what I would do. And I mean, what do they care? They don't care. If
that's what they tried. To be fair, like when the 2020 schedule came out in January of last year, there were no MLS affiliates on it, right? Like there was some Colorado Springs games, I think, on the road, and that was like a kind of affiliate. But other than that, I'm pretty sure that what I do remember for certain actually is that Real Monarchs, the defending champions, were not going to be on ESPN2, ESPN News, or ESPN Deportes that following season, which seemed very bizarre to me. But like you said, keep them playing out of sight. And the people who are watching it purely for the soccer and the young players will still find them because of ESPN Plus. So they're still there, right? But if you're looking for what I'm going to showcase, like, look, eventually it's going to kind of look like Louisville or Colorado Springs, and some of these new stadiums are just going to be hosting every single game, right? And you're just going to keep showing your best stadiums, and that's fair. But they are still adding to the league ecosystem by being part of the USL.
As usual, I pretty much always devil's advocate. And so, last time I was saying how I kind of evolved on this situation, and I have. And I think what the USL didn't foresee is, I'm realizing as you're talking and what we said earlier, is that the USL didn't foresee probably how much Americans were going to jump on board with player development and selling kids abroad. MLS2 teams are the best at that. Just because they get a better chance alone means they're going to move up faster. And so that is something that's going to get eyes in the future. And so I think when they were pushing out MLS2 teams, what was that, 2 years ago, something like that?
It was going to be, the target year was going to be 2021. Funny enough.
Okay. But I mean, it just wasn't a thing then. It's a very new thing. And so now, like, I think that's part of why I've come around to enjoying them. And I do think it is good for our national team to give independent teams aren't giving 15, 16, 17-year-olds like Tyler Adams was a chance. And thank God Red Bulls 2 was there to do that, because now look what's happening to our national team. So, those are some of the reasons, devil's advocate again, I've actually started to like it. But the fan thing is never going to be fun. It's never going to be good. It's never going to be okay in my book in a lot of ways if you're not even trying. And so I'm still going to complain about that. But at the same time, there are some good sides. And so here we are. We just got USL Championship.
And I will admit this too, by the way, because this is actually something that I've gotten asked increasingly, is how do you keep up with a league this large and also keep up with Major League Soccer? And what it ends up being is I have to choose some kind of anchor clubs. And so sometimes these are your best clubs. Like I watch a lot of Phoenix Rising. I watch a lot of Louisville City. I watch a lot of Tampa Bay Rowdies, right? But El Paso Locomotive is another team I watch a lot of. But then you're also like choosing specifically which opponent haven't I seen recently, so that I'm able to eventually cover the entire league. So like I'm not watching home games.
Exactly what I do.
Like I'm not watching these USL2 teams or these MLS2 teams like at their home stadiums. I'm never watching these games. I'm much more inclined to even watch like a game at OKC in a high school football stadium, or like when Reno was at a baseball stadium. Like I will still watch those over like a soccer specific stadium with no fans. And that is going to be even more the case after this full year of watching so many games without fans. I'm just going to continue to want the crowd and see, like, yes, that's how this influences the game. How crazy is that? Like, you all matter. Because we all do, right? So yes, I think that there is still, that is, if your biggest issue with these clubs existing is that they don't bring fans and don't care that they don't bring fans, that shouldn't be your problem. That should be their problem economically. Maybe that's a good way to frame it.
Yeah. Though you are welcome to feel that way and complain about it on Twitter. Absolutely. Right. As we do. Let's talk about the Open Cup, because we want to talk about fans. We want to talk about excitement. We want to talk about something MLS 2 teams are not a part of, actually. US Open Cup is perfect. It's coming back, and we were talking about on our last episode, Ryan mentioned that USL teams, just as many as MLS teams, 8-8, only 5 games to win to become the champion of the US Open Cup. This might be the best year for USL Championship Club to go to CONCACAF Champions League legally.
Right? That's right. You can force your way in by a coup, but those never go well. No, I think that there's definitely a chance, and I like that. Seeing the breakdown, I liked seeing that it wasn't MLS skewed. That it wasn't like we're gonna have like, you know, a 32 team tournament, 16 are coming from MLS, 8 are coming from Championship, and the other 8 are coming from League One, NISA, and the 4th tier. Right? Like, that would have been very easy for them to do. That would have had better teams in theory. But I like that it is more skewed against MLS this year for once. I think that is going to be very good. That makes the competition more watchable, frankly, to soccer nerds. The tournament has never been for casual sports fans, if we're being completely honest. Like, that is not going to be a ratings bonanza for your NFL fans in the offseason who are just kind of curious what the soccer thing's about. They're not watching the US Open Cup. They're watching Major League Soccer. So I think that that's good. I do wish that there was a little more representation of the 3rd tier. Again, now we're getting into the nitpicky stuff, right? Like, the games I enjoy the most are when you have an amateur or pro-am club in the 4th tier of American soccer who are hosting a club in the 3rd, 2nd, or 1st division, right? Like, I think about in 2019, the best game I watched was Des Moines Menace hosting St. Louis FC. And it was a game that went to penalties, and it was just like this incredible, like, I've tweeted the video so many times, but like of fans who are literally 5 feet away, which feels disgusting these days, but like from the corner kick taker, Lewis Hilton, and like yelling in his ear, like, hey, you did an outswinger last time and it didn't work, try an in-swinger, and like heckling them so close. And it's like, you couldn't get away with this in any other part of the country. And it's amazing. And that's why I love this sport so much, right? But I wish that there was more of that. I do wish that you had, you know, like, they're going to do play-in rounds out of sight mostly, but like, I wish that all of those clubs that had qualified in 2019 for the 2020 tournament, which was scrapped, would be able to enter the full tournament. But with how many different competitions are playing catch up in 2021, when you're looking at World Cup qualifiers, when you're looking at the Gold Cup, when you're looking at the Nations League, or what the Leagues Cup, whatever that thing is called that MLS competes in with Liga MX, like, you need to just condense it, say we can play it over the span of X number of weeks and move on. Like, at a certain point, you just need to get it out of the way to keep momentum going. So it's not all aces for the lower divisions, unfortunately, but it is definitely a format that should be more navigable, maybe, for a club who's wanting to be the first lower division club to win since the Rochester Raging Rhinos in '99. Yep.
The golden year. I love it. Let's talk about CONCACAF Champions League. I'm already forgetting who tweeted that out, but the fact that someone asked the head of CONCACAF, I'm blanking on his name right now, but that whether the USL would get entry in any form or fashion this time around. I don't know about the future. And he was like, no, CONCACAF Champions League US Open Cup is the only way to do it. So now we know. And now we can complain about it. Maybe you can talk about how that might be a possibility in the future, because there's rumors around. So I don't know if you have anything.
Sure. You should just win the Open Cup. So my thing, though, is I have tremendous belief and support of the second division of American soccer. I think that that's been pretty well documented over the last 5-6 years of my coverage. Second divisions shouldn't be entered in Champions Leagues. Second divisions shouldn't be entered in the secondary tier, the CONCACAF League even. I'll say that too.
Oh, really?
Because that was the next conversation, right? Is you look at it and you're like, okay, well, how do we have all these spots? Like, look at what happened with Forge in the CPL. Like, that was incredible. Like, why can't we have that too? Pick a country, Kazakhstan, okay? That it's not as good of a first division as I might have picked a bad example here, actually. No, I didn't. Compared to the championship, the EFL championship, the original championship.
Right.
But the championship doesn't have a single spot to be getting into the Europa League. Like, it's a second division league. And like, I'm sorry, like, I think that it is something aspirational. It is something that every club should want to win the US Open Cup already. That is another reason to do it. Yeah. Imagine the potential if you are suddenly hosting Club America at your stadium. Tremendous, phenomenal. Like, you should absolutely be aiming for that. But if you're going to grow the CONCACAF League, which needs to grow eventually, I think you're doing it through MLS. I think that you're doing it through Liga MX. I think you're doing it through, because right now it is very much focused on the rest of CONCACAF, right? And is trying to give opportunities for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, some of these countries that don't have the same presence when you're looking at qualification for the CONCACAF Champions League or qualification, frankly, for the Hex. And as you're looking for how do we make this more robust, how do we bring more of these teams to light, you create the equivalent of the Europa League. And that's how I view that league. I view the CONCACAF League as the Europa League for CONCACAF, which makes total sense because Europa is the league for UEFA, which is Europe. So then I'm looking at it as, okay, it's not the NIT, but it is another continental trophy. And I don't think, unless you're going to be, okay, so then maybe my other question is, if you're going to put one team in from the USL Championship, maybe it's the league finalist or the champion, and don't ask me how you would have figured that out in 2020. Are you then also putting in Liga de Expansión MX, the second division that was established, where there's no pro rel? Like, you would need to put in at least one club from that, or 1-2 match every USL Championship club that you invite into this tournament. And maybe that's a step that you take. But if you're going to do that, you can't only have the USL Championship, even if it is further along in its development and its establishment than the new second division of Mexican soccer.
No, I totally agree with that. And I would say too, that I would almost argue, and this is, a lot of people aren't going to like this, but your example about EFL Championship, I would argue that they would do fine in Europa, like say Swansea this year. Right. And maybe they deserve a bid into that competition. And so, I would say expand CONCACAF League and involve, only because the talent gap is going to be, if it's not already, it's going to be pretty big. USL Championship clubs are going to end up dominating a competition like that, even if, someone who believes maybe tier 2 champion shouldn't be part of it. I think if they can compete and they can dominate it, and I think they could in that situation in the next 5 years.
I have no doubt in my mind that if you're looking at,
absolutely,
I'm going to pick on the same clubs that I watch, right? Like, I'm going to pick on Phoenix Rising. Phoenix Rising could win that competition.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, they're deep enough. They have a strong enough first team. They've done it over a number of years where I'm not worried about their tactical format or whatever. Like, Phoenix Rising could probably win that tournament. The difference, though, is that what is that tournament for? Is it necessarily just another thing to have random clubs from across the region come together? Or is this your incentive for Belize to say, like, hey, if you win the league in Belize, like, there's something that comes with that besides domestic glory. Like, you are playing for something. If you start taking away spots for Nicaragua, and if you're saying, like, being the champion of Nicaragua, that's great, but it's the same as winning the second division. And I know there's no pro well in this country, so we think of it so differently because we're not thinking about, okay, well, then that club would just get promoted, right? Like, we're trying to find what is the additional benefit of winning this league, and that's fair. Like, that still needs to be established, but I think it's a showcase for the best teams in these countries.
With you.
Yeah, and
I misunderstood because I think Champions
yeah.
League, CONCACAF Champions League, I agree with you. USL should not be a part of it unless they win the Open Cup. I totally agree. But I think the conversation needs to definitely be give them something else. And not just for what you said, where we won our league, we deserve a place somewhere. I want to know where my league matches up, and my league being the championship. I want to know how they match up against the rest of the Caribbean and Central America. And maybe the winner of that competition gets a bid into Champions League, maybe. But at least give me something like, how do we fare against Jamaican teams? And I want to know there's no other competition for it, and we can't get promoted, something needs to be there.
For sure. But that is how soccer is set up in this country.
Right.
There are some serious setbacks at various points of it, but it is working as it was designed. And I think that there is no, it is.
Part.
It is the worst part. Like this is exactly how it was supposed to look. The difference, though, is, again, what is the CONCACAF League? And if you're going to tell me it is the Europa League, but for CONCACAF, which is what I view it as until I'm told otherwise, I only want first division clubs there. And I don't care if it's a country that, I'm not familiar with their league. I'm not familiar with their clubs. I would rather watch the champion of the best, like the best team from Nicaragua. I would rather watch that if I am just like trying to size up the federation, rather than try to play, we don't have pro rel, so this is the best we can do, which is the case, by the way, now for the next 5 years in Mexico as well. I don't see a compelling reason to do that, right? Like, again, if you're purely saying I want the best teams possible, please throw in the USL Championship. But if you want the best teams possible, frankly, they're going to just choose more clubs from MLS or more clubs from Liga MX. Like, they're not going to choose the second division at a certain point if they're building this thing out involving North America more. So it sucks, right? Like, this is where we're just kind of in this like limbo of, okay, well, how do you actually assess this league? And this is something that the championship, the USL Championship, is going through right now, is like, where are we? Like, how do we stack up with other second divisions? How do we stack up with some first divisions now? Because they're in the conversation now. They weren't 3 years ago. But I don't think continental soccer is the way that they're going to be able to go about that.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I'm also curious about how it would help. And this is actually what they should argue as far as business and money is concerned within CONCACAF, is if we get USL Championship teams in a competition against all these random countries, it gives them another chance to scout. It gives them a reason to send their dollars to Virgin Islands or Nicaragua a little more often. And so there's an argument for the CONCACAF committee to let them in for money reasons. You know what I mean? And MLS isn't the only ones with dollars, $10, $20, $50,000 is a lot to someone in Nicaraguan first league. And so,
by the way, if there's prize money in the CONCACAF league and a USL championship's allowed in it, like if they are allowed 1 or 2 spots in it, you can't tell me that's not the full focus of that team until that competition ends. If they can get actual prize money from this, and you could win the equivalent of the Europa, that is it. Like, you're going to have some rotated squads as much as you can do at this level in the regular season. Like, you're going to be punting on some of those games for travel trips, whatever it means. Like, that it would be the full focus if there was suddenly incentive to get prize money.
I'm telling you, that's what I
want.
It'd be a lot of fun. But let's move on. If we could go on that all day for sure. Let's talk about.
Go on with a lot of things. To be fair, like it's so a problem. I'm locked down. What's better to do than just talk soccer with good company?
So, I agree. If we were in a bar and we had 3 beers,
which we've been in a bar.
It's true. But imagine us talking about that late at night with 3 beers in us. I'd be getting loud and red in the face for sure. It'd be a lot of fun.
To be fair, that was a tequila soda. So.
Oh, nice.
To be fair. In fact, I might make another, but anyway, keep going.
Please do. Well, I wish we could hand one over digitally through this video here. Let's talk expansion, though. Let's start with the good and we'll end on the bad. USL Pro Iowa 2023. These are all hopefuls, right? Rhode Island 2023, Queensboro 2022. That seems pretty solid, probably. These 3 clubs look pretty cool. Pro Iowa has my favorite stadium. The stadium looks awesome. What do you think about the clubs?
I think that I'm very interested in what has been the continued growth and investment in New England. For whatever reason, pro soccer in America expansion goes in regions. First part of the 2010s was the Pacific Northwest. The second half of the 2010s was the Southeast. It looks like we've moved on to the Northeast. And I can't wait till it gets to the Midwest, because my travel budget would thank me if I could actually drive to some of these games. But I think that it is interesting to see, because there's been one team there up until, Hartford Athletic, where they're called New England, but they're Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the Revolution are not representing Maine, for example. So then put a team in Portland, Maine, in the 3rd division and see how it goes. Put a team in Rhode Island, in Pawtucket, and let's see how it goes. It's great. I think that's a fantastic growth. I think that there is some serious concentrated effort into growing it out in that region, because there are so many people, there's so much capital, frankly. Those are some of the wealthier per capita states in the country. Yeah. Go for it. I think that's awesome. I think that the more road trips you can allow soccer fans in this country to have, where you can hit like 3 or 4 different clubs over a week and not have an issue with it, except for the scheduling of games, the better. I think that's a great way to be able to grow this game's footprint in this country. So then we are at Des Moines. Of course, love it. Want more of it. I could drive there in a day. I'm super happy about it. That's like 3-4 hours away from me in Minneapolis. Please make that club come through, Kyle Krause. Then you're looking at Queensboro, and look, Queensboro has had elephant in the room issues as I pour my soda for a while now with David Villa, which have largely gone unaddressed, except for one club statement, which didn't go over well in reaction to the credible accusations of sexual harassment against David Villa during his time in New York City FC, as reported by Pablo Maurer, my colleague. Their statement was not good. Frankly, I think that is a case where if you don't have anything productive to say, don't say it. But they learned from it, I think, as far as I've understood. I think that having a 2nd division club in New York, specifically in a borough, is a fantastic idea. I think that that's something that makes a ton of sense. If you can build that stadium there, that's perfect. Like a 10,000 seat stadium in New York City would probably sell itself, right? Yeah. Even just from tourists, much less your fans. Are they going to have an identity crisis? Are there going to be issues about having a crest that's a giant Q after what we've all gone through in 2020? Probably. I wouldn't have done it. But what I would do then is, this is my pipe dream that I've already spoken about on, I think, on Sirius XM with Jason Davis. But I need this to happen. I need Queensboro to buy the branding to the New York Cosmos now that club is on hiatus again, and bring the Cosmos to Queens and build them a stadium and just call yourself the New York Cosmos. Oh my gosh, that's the best club in the world. That's my favorite club in the world, is the New York Cosmos in Queens in the USL. Perfect. I love it. And it just makes so much sense. You have them in an established league. You have them with their own stadium. You have them with dedicated ownership. It also, if you choose to part with David Villa, if you're that club, quietly in the night, that's a great time to do it. That is the 5th paragraph of that press release. It's just, and by the way, he has moved on to other projects. We think
one sentence. Yeah.
That's it. That's all you need to do. And no one cares, because like, holy shit, we got the Cosmos in the USL. Everyone wins. That's how you do it. That is the safest way that you're able to make that transition away. I hope it happens.
I'm going to tell you one problem with that is that it makes too much sense, Jeff. It makes too much sense for U.S. soccer.
And I said all of this stuff too, by the way, when Beckham was stalling, or when the clock was stalling on Beckham with Miami. I had been like, okay, well, Red Bulls doesn't want New York, because they realize now that they're not in New York. So just let them sell the Cosmos rights to MLS and have Beckham run the New York Cosmos in Major League Soccer. That was my initial wish for the Cosmos. So apparently all I wish for these days is for the Cosmos to be sold to other entities.
Hey, it's fair. It's what I want too. It's all I want is for the Cosmos to come to USL or MLS would be just fine with me as well. While we're on bad news, let's talk about Monterey Bay. Apparently they're coming in. I heard you say on unused substitutes. By the way, if you haven't heard a subject talked about, it's because it was on that show probably. So go listen to that show. You were just on their show a week or two ago. But you mentioned they'd be coming in probably 2023.
22, 23, yeah.
If at all, I mean, are they really going to happen? I guess if
for Monterey, I mean, like they got the announcement, right? Like they've already done that. They had the announcement that it was Ray Beshoff still from Fresno FC, as well as possibly some other investors locally, that there would be a stadium as part of this. Didn't quite get the reaction nor the initial fanfare of Oakland or some of these stadium updates from Des Moines or Pawtucket or whatever. What specifically do you want me to say about Monterey?
I don't know how much trouble you want to be in.
that's why I'm asking you. Like I have already tweeted some thoughts. I stand by all of them. They got shared by an American investor in soccer that raised some points that were good points.
Oh yeah, Jordan Gardner. Go check those out. Those are good ones.
Yeah.
He said enough, to be honest.
He did say enough, and he said it well. But I think that there is some consternation. I'm going to choose big words here because maybe that gets me in less trouble. Around the concept of an owner having completely failed in a market that looked tailor-made for American soccer being given a do-over with no additional investment. That is a very kind of strange concession to give, which other owners who maybe would have made more sense to give that concession to were not given that luxury. There is that sound you heard was my dog saying I'm too loud and moving to his other bed.
Love it.
Yeah, I think that there's some.
It's just got to be legal, right? Because it's like nothing makes sense unless they have a legal right that can't be worked around at this point.
Well,
right?
you have you have the charter, right? And when you have the franchise charter, you have that until you get rid of it, right? Like, I think that the most obvious transfers of a franchise charter in the USL have been when Orlando City went to Major League Soccer and sold it to Louisville City, started it kind of as like an offspring affiliate sort of thing, and then became its own independent entity very quickly and very successfully, to be fair. And then when Ottawa Fury could not get sanctioning to play in the United States ahead of 2020, which ended up being a very good thing for that club, by the way, with all of the border difficulties and the travel bans.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about it until right now, but like,
true.
What good luck suddenly, where it's like either you could have to be fortified up in, I don't know, Montana for a year, or you could sell it to the Miami FC. And so they did that, which was a very good piece of business in retrospect before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But other than that, it just hasn't happened a lot, right? Like there isn't necessarily the resale market of American soccer in general. And MLS will be involved in this. And obviously the League One hasn't seen a resale yet, but that's, that I think that there are a lot of owners who didn't look at Fresno as pushing the league forward either. I think that was something that became an issue as Fresno's tenure went on. Now, the big difference, of course, this will be the litmus test of does having a dedicated soccer-specific stadium, which is now being renovated in Monterey at that California State campus, is that the magic ticket where you can get over some of these other issues that were functioning at baseline expectations, but not much above with Fresno, frankly. They just were very smart about who they chose. And part of that's Frank Gallup. Part of that is, the players that they brought in. Is the stadium enough? That's going to be a fascinating test of how much does a stadium matter. And I'll be very curious to see what the answer is, to be fair. Like, it could be very good, right? Like, there is still a timeline where Monterey makes a lot of sense. Now, it's a smaller market than Fresno. It is a more remote market. There aren't like airports that fly more than crop dusters.
I've been to that airport. It's small.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're the first person I've spoken. Okay, tell me about that airport. You're the first person. Is there a Benihana's at that airport?
No, there's absolutely not. I don't even think there's a Starbucks. You are flying, and I was on a smaller plane. I went from San Francisco to Monterey on a small plane, 2 props. And it's just, you see water. You're like, where's land? Where's land? Where's land? You see it and you're on the ground. It's cool. It's fun. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful town. But not a big population.
Why did you fly there? You don't have to tell me this on air, but like, I am fascinated by why you flew there, but I'll get that later. Yeah, it's remote, right? Like, it's like you said, like the approach I'm sure is scary, but it's, again, how are you going to get San Antonio there?
Yeah.
Because they'll be in the Western Conference forever. And like, do you fly into Fresno and then leave Fresno? Because that's a little ironic if you think about it.
Right.
I don't know what you do. I really don't know what you do
I
to
don't
get clubs
either.
to that stadium. So I think it happens. Yeah, I think at this point the league would have safeguarded any sort of oops that could have happened along the way by now before they made this formal announcement. The USL has never made a welcome to the league announcement that did not result in that club playing in the league. That has never happened. So I would guess that they are very good about vetting that. Whether they play in 2025, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see, right? Like, we'll see. Like, it's just,
Right.
there are a lot of things about this that don't add up, that make less sense than Fresno did. But we'll see. And
Great points there.
Yeah.
I could see it happening. I love your thought about the stadium. Does a stadium make it work? Because that would be, we could prove a lot of things here. It could be very helpful to soccer in second tier and below. Last topic here is the USL Impact Committee.
Mm-hmm.
I am looking at the list of names here, and it is so freaking good. I think the USL hit a home run with this in every single way, except they should have done it 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, but you're right. Like, and I would have the exact same sort of critique, but I'll have to remind myself that like it's better to do it now than not do it.
Agree. This list is amazing.
Like no, it's all areas of the USL ecosystem. It is all I don't know. Like I think that you have a lot of different vantage points. You have people who've been in the league for a while. You have people who are looking at the league with fresh eyes. I mean that you have, like, I'm just going to read the job titles of these people, and you've heard of a fair number of these people if you follow the USL, but I won't even say their names for this. You have the Latino outreach manager, the president of a club, the chief purpose officer of a club, the head of marketing and brand of a club, the senior advisor to a club, corporate partnerships coordinator of a club, senior director of corporate partnership at a club, executive director of a foundation of a club. Like, these are the kinds of people that you want to help. Like, you can't just have sporting directors and owners making these decisions. Sometimes you need the people who are closer to the people, frankly, to the fans, to the players, to the communities in general. And so, like, I think it's a fantastic outreach. I mean, like, look, we'll see, right? Like, what comes of it, but I don't think anything bad can come from it, right? Like, like you said, like, it's a home run. Like, it makes there's nothing that like is a risk with that, with the vetting. When you look at the names of these people, like, I know several of these people personally, like, they're very good people. I'm very excited to see what comes from that, because I think that even if you just look at the fact that there were three cases of verbal abuse, either on the basis of racism or homophobia, over the span of 2 seasons in that league, when you haven't seen any that have been reported in other North American leagues in that time, you need to do something. And they have reacted very convincingly, I will say, and effectively. And of course, it's all what comes from this, right? It's not about announcements, it's about action. But they've set themselves up for some quality action, and I think that that's something that's very commendable.
Completely agree. I do think there's one thing that can go wrong, and I just say this because I want everybody to give, I admire all these names on here. I admire how they put it together, but something's going to go wrong at some point. Something is going to happen, and everyone's just going to want to bomb the Impact Committee like they screwed up and like they didn't do their job well enough. It is going to be a thankless job, and they're going to get blamed, or they're not going to be mentioned. You know what I mean? So I hope people think about that. If something does go wrong. Look, should we circle
back?
We're
getting about the end. So I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Whoa. How are you? Because I feel like when we talk about the USL show, but when we talk about in general your coverage of the USL, and again, like all of you over at the Beautiful Game Network, I think do fantastic work to be able to like kind of showcase broader areas than some national folks, including myself, frankly. Even how much I cover the USL, there's still blind spots. There's a lot of blind spots, inevitably. So credit to all of you. But you lost your club this year. And I know that you've been able to talk about that in the moment, right? Like, I'm sure that there were reactions when, like, I put out the initial report that it was 90% likely, and then and the aftermath and all of this stuff. But like, as you hear announcements in like, May, the sport's coming back and the regular season will kick off and here's our playoff format. And, oh, should we get into CONCACAF League or not? Right. Like, you don't necessarily have the same skin in it this year. Like, how, as you're looking at this coming year in the future, how are you feeling about your place without St. Louis FC?
I hate it. Especially now that it's pushed back to 2023. I mean, it's killed me. And we were talking before the show about how even 2 of our amateur clubs are not going to play this year. So now we've added one in St. Louis, or Scott Gallagher added a USL League 2 team. Right. So they'll be taking the place of the Lions that aren't playing this year, but we have a UPSL team, and I'm rooting for them in the open, or I guess I'm not rooting for them in the Open Cup.
Right.
Gosh, but at least I have live soccer to watch, and I've got, some of these players. Sometimes Josh Sargent played on the last U23 entity that came out of Scott Gallagher. So, there's people to root for. There's hopes and dreams to be had here, but USL Championship was something special. People showed up. It's a beautiful stadium. Got to play some amazing games against MLS clubs in the Open Cup. A lot of good playoff games and games to get us into the playoffs that knocked us out of the playoffs. A lot of memories. And
Oh, especially after that last year too. Oh, how that ended. Like,
oh my gosh. It was high stakes, like 6 games in a row.
And that's a thing where usually you'd be like, we got through the first round at Hartford, we lost in the second. Like, next year, just wait. And there's no next year, right? And like, this is the part of the show, by the way, where if you're watching this live on YouTube, thank you. First of all, I don't know why, but second, if you still are, this might become slightly therapy. So like, if you aren't ready for this, you can tune this out. We're going to talk about clubs folding. I've had a club essentially fold. The last American soccer club I truly supported was Minnesota United in the NASL. And when they went to MLS, like, I was like, look, I want to do this for a living. Like, I basically worked my way to a homegrown contract at the Athletic. Like, I am going to have to not be a fan of the new club. And it's very easy to do. And you'll find this too, because it's like a new coach, new identity. Like, yes, the name was the same with Minnesota United's case, but everything else was different except for like 5 players. So it'll be very easy to make that transition. But watching like the last regular season game, naturally at home to the New York Cosmos, because that's how the fates work. And it was a 1-0 loss because that's how the fates work. But like, you go through this and you're just like, fuck. Like, that's it. Like, you just, there's no, you don't take the time to truly like decompress in the moment. Like, it all has to come after, because that's how soccer works, right? Like, no one's ever like just at peace going to a soccer game. That's not a emotion that exists for most of us. But I feel like it must be strange to continue, because I took a little bit of a hiatus. I didn't really cover 2017 lower division. I was all in on MLS as I made that transition, and then kind of circled back midway through 2018. And ever since, I've been focusing on the second division more. But there's got to be something that's just kind of bizarre about continuing to cover this league, steamroll business as usual, knowing that your club is no longer part of this. Like, it's amazing how numb so many of us covering this sport have gotten to clubs folding. Like, it's crazy if you really think about it. Just like, we're just like, oh, Reno, yeah, they were good, moving on. Like, and that's it. That's all Reno really got for the most part, was like a day of people being like, oh man, like, okay, well, where's Ian Russell gonna go? Where are all these players gonna go? Right? Like, it's incredible. Or like St. Louis, like, it was an amazing tribute video put out by the league. Or like Sam Fink put out some tremendous statements, and Pat Barry as well, and like Steve Trisha. Like, all of these people have said the right things, but we move on. And it's focus on Queensboro, focus on Monterey, focus on Oakland, focus on like, okay, who cares? But here's what's new. And like, I can't think of another league ecosystem. And I'm not just talking the United States. I'm not just talking soccer either. Like, I'm thinking like minor league baseball, like the amount of hand wringing and sadness over teams folding or losing their affiliations, and towns no longer having that summer ticket available. Like, I don't think that's really replicated right now in soccer. And it bums me out, because every year since 2014 is as far back as I got before I just got depressed about it. There have been at least 2 or 3 clubs folding in the second division of American soccer every single year. Like I have it on a notepad. And again, this is a bummer of a notepad, but here we are. Clubs that have folded: 2015, the Austin Aztecs; 2016, FC Montreal Wilmington Hammerheads; 2017, Vancouver Whitecaps 2, Rochester Rhinos, Orlando 2, 2018, Penn FC, Richmond put themselves in the third division, Toronto FC 2 relegated. And again, like some of these, of course, are going to be affiliates, but then you get to 2019, Ottawa Fury, Fresno FC; 2020, Toronto FC 2 actually folding. Or actually taking the season off. You've got Philly 2 deciding to opt out of the league. You've got Reno, St. Louis, North Carolina FC moving to the third division in a fully developmental route, which I think they're going to be great at with John Bradford. But like that is so much over the span of 7 years. And we haven't even talked about the NASL. So then you're not even considering like the Cosmos going on hiatus 2 different times. You're not talking about Miami going on hiatus for a year. Jacksonville Armada is still somewhere in the ether. Puerto Rico FC in the ether. San Francisco Deltas winning the title and then folding after 1 year. It sucks, man. Like it really does suck. And like when you think of how many different like club employees, fans, whatever, I know this has just become a rant, but like
it's a good one.
It's hard. It really is, especially as someone who like, I don't know, I put a lot of energy into like trying to showcase why the second division of American soccer and eventually the third division are so worth focusing on. But like there's been so much focus on expansion that I feel like the actual contraction side of it has been muted with its actual impact.
I completely agree. I'm so close to it, and a lot of people here in St. Louis are freaking out and wringing their hands. I mean, it is a mess out here in some ways, but it is kind of like a loud minority because the other thing is going to be so exciting. There's so many more people coming in, but it is, you listed those clubs, and we don't even think about most of them. Maybe once a year we think about someone like the Jacksonville Armada and wish they'd come back, and I do wish they'd come back. But they're gone. And it's making me realize that like American soccer, the second tier of American soccer in a good situation is a very new thing. It is so freaking new. AAA baseball has been around probably maybe 100 years now, right?
Right.
Maybe more. Yeah. So like it is such a new thing, and we have these clubs that just aren't stable and they're folding, and we're just getting used to it. I completely agree with you. A lot of people losing their jobs, a lot of players unsigned. I'm thinking about St. Louis FC players. A lot of really quality players have nowhere right now. I've seen a couple of them like, hey, when you see it on Twitter is when it hurts the most, right? Like, hey, I'm looking for a team.
Or you'll see like Stephen Miller played so long for the Railhawks and for North Carolina FC, like announcing like,
so weird.
What are your choices? Like you leave where you've lived for 7 years and play at the same level and have to readjust, or you just move on. And like those are good legs. Or like when the NASL, that off season going into the 2018 season, that's actually, if I remember where my head was at, that's why I stopped covering it for a while, is it was just like bleak, like seeing like Ryan Richter at 28 years old, this like an incredible right back for like the New York Cosmos, just being like, I'm just going to coach because at least there's a job there and I know I'll have it for 2 years. And it's like, you've got to do that at a certain point. It's tough, man. It is really tough. Or like seeing like I mean, I could keep saying names, right? But like, I think that's all part of this still. And you look at it and it's like, AAA baseball took some establishment. But if I'm looking at like, what is going to be the benchmark that I think showcases how successful the second division currently is in the moment of U.S. soccer, it's not going to be when more clubs join. It's not going to be when this stadium is built. It's going to be when clubs stop folding. Yeah. And that's why, by the way, like I think this CBA is so invaluable, not just for the players. Of course it is for the players, but it is for the league because it ensures that all of its clubs are meeting these baseline requirements that imply we are a club that will be around for at least 2 more years. Yeah. And then that second year kind of like, it's like a stepping stone thing where that becomes a third and a fourth and a fifth, because you know that they're operating the way successful clubs operate. You know that they are not in a tailspin that ends with a blaze of glory. You know that those are avoidable, because you've established that. That's why the CBA is so crucial. And I know we didn't really get to talk about it too much this time because it's still kind of in the works and hush hush. But I will also say, when you compare it with how loudly the MLS negotiations were, you should be feeling pretty good about how quiet the USL negotiations are, because that means things are going at a pretty happy rate. But man, that's why it matters, because when clubs stop folding, that's when everything feels more stable. And when things are more stable, that's when you're actually able to grow.
And you can make maybe better arguments about CONCACAF Champions League.
Right. Finally, you're like, okay, well, you didn't have 2 clubs fold, so yeah, we'll consider it.
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
Exactly. Jeff, thanks so much for talking to us today. Oh, also, Alan Underwood said that minor league baseball started in 1901. So 120 years.
Wow.
Look at that.
Our mental math is at the same rate. That's good to see.
That's why we can hang. We're mentally, we can hang with each other.
That's why we can hang.
But I want to thank Alan for signing on. Winston Ransom was on for a while. Kubica-esque. Harry, of course, signed on. So thank you guys for listening, even if it was just partial, and contributing comments. It was mostly comments and conversation, but mostly, again, Jeff, thanks to you. Thanks for your writing. Enjoy it every day, man.
Anytime, man. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jeff Rueter. I don't know. I don't hate your club. I don't. Sorry. I promise. I don't. Whoever you are, I don't hate your club.
All right, everybody. Have a good one. We'll talk to you next time.
And we're out.